Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Turner, and I direct the China Environment Forum here at the Wilson Center. I've been here for 23 years, putting on meetings, creating publications, acting as a matchmaker for US and Chinese and other folks around the world that work on energy and environmental issues. I have to announce, today is the very first day that I'm back at hosting my in-person meetings. Yay, we gotta be happy about this. And I realized last night that my last one, which was a few days before DC closed down, was also about biodiversity. I had Rose Nyo from the Paulson Institute and some folks from National Park Service. We were talking about US and Chinese cooperation around creating national parks. So I thought somehow we've bookended the pandemic with biodiversity. How appropriate is that? Where are we at? So today's meeting, I already said it's on biodiversity. It's called China's Biodiversity Action at Home and Overseas. And the reason we chose that topic was last December, on the 19th to be exact, there were many black-eyed, saggy, tired delegates at the COP15 Convention on Biological Diversity delegation, folks. And they finally adopted, in the 11th hour, an ambitious Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to conserve 30% of the world's land and 30% of the ocean by 2030. What's notable is that China headed the CBD, and then in the end was kind of co-chaired with Canada so they could hold it up in Montreal. And in the past few years, prior to that, again, when I had my last meeting in 2020, that China really had begun ramping up its action on biodiversity at home with its laws. There was a Yangtze River protection law, wetland protection law, and it was very encouraging, kind of part of their movement to be the leader in this, of this convention. So today, a couple months afterwards, we're going to dive into China's biodiversity protection efforts, as I said, the title says, at home and overseas. So we're going to start off with Fenga here. She's a visiting scholar at the Paul Tsai China Center at Yale Law School. She's an environmental protection lawyer in China, a quite steely one, if I dare say that. She worked for 6 years at the legal department of Friends of Nature, and those of you who are China hands, you do know that that was China's first environmental NGO. And what I thought was most amazing on your bio was that you were one of the people leading the charge for Chinese NGOs to have a voice in bringing public interest lawsuits, that kind of changes in China's environmental protection law. And today she's going to talk about and share some stories about NGOs leading public interest litigation cases around biodiversity. So you laid the groundwork and then you ran on that ground. Second, we'll have Zhao Zhang, long time no see. I think this is your third time speaking at the center, but it's been many moons. He's also a visiting scholar of the Paul Tsai China Center at the Yale Law School. I must thank the Yale Law School for bringing these two people to us here today. And he also is the founder of Green Camel Bell in Lanzhou, is your home. I still need to visit that place soon. So his NGO, they're well known in my network for being a really outstanding grassroots organization that works, starting off a lot at the local level, community empowerment, issues around environmental education, water pollution monitoring, and then nationally around China, building the capacity of other Chinese NGOs to encourage public participation. He's a rock star, okay? Shh. Don't let it get to his head. So today he's going to talk about, you can ask in the Q&A about his domestic work, but he's going global in his comments today. He's going to talk about Green Camel Bell's partnerships with Southeast Asian NGOs to investigate the impact of Chinese-funded projects on community and biodiversity in Southeast Asia. I think specifically Indonesia and Cambodia. He may surprise me with another country. Third, last but never least, we have Andrew Morimoto. He's the director of research at the Paulson Institute and a policy fellow at their Green Finance Center. Very appropriate. Paulson before COVID, Paulson right after COVID, yes. He's going to be examining the challenges facing Chinese and global biodiversity financing, drawing on the work that he's done at Paulson on the intersection of climate policy, green finance, and US-China relations. Enough on me. Greeting to the people out that are watching live, and greeting to you gloriously 3D people here. Are you ready, ma'am? Yeah. It's time. Here's your weapon. Turn on your speaker, and we're going to have a live conversation here in DC. It's all you. Good, you have your sheet here, right?
Okay.
And make sure you bring that close enough.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ge Feng. You can call me Feng. I'm an environmental protection lawyer this semester in law schools of Yale University, Paocai China Center. And thank you so much for coming, and thank you to the Wilson Center for organizing this event. And today, my topic is about environmental public interest litigation in China. Can you find me in this picture?
You're the one in the life vest.
Yeah, yeah,
Do you want to use paper or computer?
yeah.
So we can
And
close the computer?
yeah. Oh no!
Sorry. This doesn't happen on Zoom. I'm not in your space on Zoom.
Yeah, it's me in the middle of on the left. This might look like a vacation photo, but it is not. This is a team organized by Friends of Nature to gather evidence for an environmental public interest lawsuit. Our team was gathering evidence to prove that this river valley was an important habitat of the green peafowl, an endangered species. There are only 500 green peafowls left in China. The green peafowl is a beautiful bird that represents happiness and auspiciousness in Chinese culture. And you see, at that moment, a dam was being built, and it would have flooded the river valley and destroyed the habitat of the green peafowl. We sued the dam company to halt the project and saved the green peafowl. Now, when people in China think of protecting biodiversity, they usually do not think of lawsuits. Instead, they usually think of this system that are enforced by government agencies. Yeah, you can see. However, this system lacks public participation and oversight. And without these factors, enforcement can be incomplete. That's why environmental public interest litigation is an important supplement. Environmental public interest litigation gives certain NGOs, like Friends of Nature, I worked for 9 years, standing to sue companies that are harming the environment. This is key because the green peafowl obviously cannot sue the government and dam company. NGOs need to stand in their place. I think this case illustrates why such bottom-up advocacy is important. After we learned from local environmentalists about the dam project that would flood the river valley, and we filed a complaint with the Ministry of Environmental Protection, MEP for short. Today it is called the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. We asked the MEP to do something about the dam. But the company promised to do more research work about the dam construction impact on environment, but they just still doing construction. So we decide to take matters into our own hands. We sued the company and immediately went to the media to create public pressure. To win the case, we knew we would have to prove that the dam's flood zone was an important habitat of the green peafowl. And however, because the area is so remote, There was little documentation of their presence there. We had to go and record the evidence ourselves. We organized 6 trips to the green peafowl's habitat. There were no roads that went there directly, so after driving as far as we could, we got then rafts to travel down the river to the habitat of the green peafowl. The road to the riverside was damaged severely, you can see, perhaps intentionally. We had to fill the large trench to cross the broken gap. After the road ended, we would raft down the river. The water was rough. At one point, the director of Friends of Nature fell into the river. It was in danger. Luckily, he's a good swimmer, yeah. But it was worth it. On these journeys, we recorded many green peafowls. They were eating, drinking, and raising their young. They were not just stopping by for a short term, like the company complained. This was their habitat. In the end, the court agreed with us and ordered to stop the construction of the dam. Ironically, because of pressure from the public and the government, by the time the court ruled, the company had already stopped construction. What happened outside of court more important than what happened inside the court. Yeah, later, the Supreme People's Court recognized our case as a guiding case. Mainly, all the courts in China should refer to this case when judging similar kinds of cases. That's very important because we have a lot of similar cases pending. Yeah, the case was also included in the SDG Good Practices by UN. Yeah, that's why that's my favorite case. I would like to highlight 2 more environmental public interest litigation. This is about the nature reserve protection. You know, China has set up nature reserve system, but enforcement is weak. The Nanling National Nature Reserve in the south of China is rich in biodiversity. A road was being built in the core area of the nature reserve several years ago. The construction has caused serious environmental damage. We filed a lawsuit in 2016 against the company who built the road. The court ruled that the road built by the defendant violated the law because that area should not be used for tourism. The court ordered the defendant to pay 5 million RMB to restore the area. The restoration process would be subject to the supervision of the plaintiff and the society. That's very important. Why? Because under supervision by court and our plaintiff and the public, after a 3-year restoration, the ecosystem started to gradually recover, you can see. We saw a young chick of the catbird's tragopan, an endangered species that only lives in China. About hundreds of left in China. This is what it looked like when it grew up. Yeah, it's unique. Yeah. The third case I want to introduce was to protect a coastal wetland. The coastal wetland in southeast of China is a natural habitat for a variety of migratory seabirds, such as the spoonbill, sandpiper, and other endangered species. In the face of rapid habitat loss and degradation, this coastal wetland is critical to the survival and reproduction of plovers and sandpipers throughout the East Asia Australasia migratory zone. But a surrounding embankment was building, destroying more than 1,500 hectares of coastal wetlands. The construction was stopped temporarily by the central government after our reporting to the government. Now the lawsuit is pending. Yeah, we are looking forward to the final decision by the court. EPIL can be a powerful tool, you can see, for protecting biodiversity, but it has its limits. Sometimes these limitations are in the law. For example, most environmental NGOs don't have access to EPIL because they do not have high enough registration status, but we need more NGOs to participate in protecting biodiversity. A few NGOs working on this issue is not enough also. Right now, no environmental NGO can use EPIL to sue the government. But sometimes we need to do this to get the local governments to take action. Some limitations of EPIL are connected to bigger issues. NGOs in China are quite weak. We do not have resources, and we are outside the system, of course. We need more allies and more room to develop. Also, courts are just one player in a larger system with even bigger players. The government needs to reform the legal system further to diminish pressure from local officials on courts. For example, there are more cross-regional environmental courts in China that are more independent of local governments. So we will keep bringing more EPIL cases, and at the same time, we will advocate for changes in the legal system that will allow civil society to play a bigger and bigger role in protecting the ecosystems and biodiversity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Let's give some applause here for Funga. And at the end, I'll have you guys ask questions. I might gonna get his slides up, make notes of your questions, and just in case, EPIL is Environmental Public Interest Lawsuits. Just had to remind myself that as well. So Jiaozhang, I'm getting your slides up here. Do you want to introduce yourself any more than I did already? If we're good? All right. You know yourself, they know you. All right, hang on. Okay, you are set, sir.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the invitation by Jennifer. Thanks for coming. And in 2011, I used to talk at the China Environmental Forum here about wetland protection in Western China. I'm glad to be back. And in the past 12 years, many things have a lot changed. And Jennifer is still as young as ever. And my title and organization have a lot changed. Still the founder and the director of Green Campbell, and without any promotions.
And I'm still here too.
Yeah.
Same job. Can you make sure you pull your mic a little bit closer to yourself?
Yeah.
There you go. Want to make sure you're loud and clear for the people out in internet land.
Okay, but the world has also undergone many sweeping changes in past 12 years. Technology revolutions such as artificial intelligence and blockchains, the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Me Too movement, and the emerging Chinese economy. With it, the increasing Chinese overseas investment and the China's rising impact on biodiversity overseas. Although my organization is still a very small grassroots NGO, we are following the Better Road initiative to go out we are increasingly concerned about the social and environmental impact of Chinese overseas investment, especially energy and forest-related investment. Today, I will share two cases from our work on biodiversity in Southeast Asia. And how did I start my fantastic journey? And it started 17 years ago in Cambodia. The river in this photo is called Charon River in Central Cardamom Protected Forest in Cambodia. Around 2007, about 16 years ago, the Cambodia government planned to build a hydropower station on this river, and some Chinese company showed a strong interest in investing and participating in it. An environmental organization of Cambodia invited me to investigate the proposed site because they thought Chinese knows Chinese. And, but in fact, the fact is, although I already had several years of experience working in community-based environmental protection in China, I knew almost nothing about Chinese overseas investment at that time. With the mindset of a free trip, I began my journey on Chinese overseas investment very impurely. The proposed construction site and the nearby impacted region is a key biodiversity hotspot with 95% forest coverage. The forest is the habitat of some globally endangered species such as Siamese crocodile, Asian elephant, Asian dragonfish. Siamese crocodile is listed as a critically endangered species by IUCN. Local indigenous people found that first, some Cambodia students were hired by a Chinese company to conduct a social survey of land and population in that community. Then some Chinese workers were stationed nearby with equipment to investigate river, farmland, and forest. There was no official word from the government or the Chinese company, but they learned through unofficial grapevine that a Chinese power company was planning to build a hydropower station in the river near their community. Their houses and farmland would be flooded, and they were forced to resettle far away. Villagers in these communities just returned back their hometown 20 years ago after the war. They told us they have been living here for hundreds of years. Then the French came. When the French left, the Japanese came. When the Japanese left, the American came. When the American left, the Vietnamese came. After the Vietnamese left, now you, the Chinese, were coming to take our land again. I feel very embarrassed to be there. Not a single person in the community agreed to build this dam. Also, in 2007, the United Nations passed the Declaration on the Right of Indigenous People. The declaration emphasized that indigenous people have the right to their land and resources, which have traditional owned and occupied. Every country should obtain indigenous people's free and informed consent prior to the approval of any project affecting their land and resources. As a Chinese, I do know more about Chinese and the community as well. Using the trust and the dialogue channel by Chinese investors, I strived to act as a bridge between affected community and the Chinese investors. After come back to China, we wrote a report to record what we saw and what we heard on the trip. When I had a chance to meet with in person, to meet with a staff of the company in person, I just shared the report with him. And he was very nervous to receive my report, tell me he couldn't make any promise to me. And I said, you don't need to give me any promise. You may not have a choice to visit a village or talk to talk with those community members. So I just repeated what I heard in the village to you. If possible, please also share the report and consider by local villagers and environmentalists with your colleagues, especially the decision makers in your company. Also, several NGOs sent an open letter to Chinese company requesting their carefully consideration of this program. Finally, the good news is this hydropower project was canceled. The Yangtze River is still free flowing. The wildlife there is saved, and indigenous people there also free from forced resettlement. Therefore, I did not feel guilty due to the impulse purpose of free travel. And I got more free travel opportunities. In 2013, my organization joined the Environmental Paper Network, a global coalition of organizations working to promote sustainable and responsible practice in pulp and paper industry. In the network, we established a partnership with some Indonesian organizations. I got a 10-day free trip to Indonesia the fall of 2014. We flew to Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, transferred to Riau province on Sumatra Island, and took a vehicle to the Tibet transport dock, then another 5 hours ride on a small wooden boat, then a hike through the forest. Finally, we reached our destination. We were treated a heartbreaking and shocking sight. Excavators and chainsaw were wreaking havoc in the forest. Pieces of trees had been cut down, leaving only short roots on the ground. We saw the impact of human activities on the natural land. And it made us feel sad, angry, and desperate. This was once the habitat of Sumatra tiger, Sumatra elephant, and Sumatra orangutan, and other wildlife. A report by WWF shows that in last 25 years, 70% of Sumatra elephant habitat had gone, and its population reduced 50% in this area. The villagers nearby were surprised and curious to see us, saying it was the first time they had seen Chinese people in their village. But the Chinese influence on them in the village had been there before our arriving. The deforestation is made by the Asia Pulp and Paper Group, APP, a notorious paper company in Asia. Their development was not only destroying the peatland forest ecosystem, but also impacting the livelihood of local people who depend on natural resources. Most of local indigenous people, however, had not heard of this project, much less agreed to the deforestation near their communities. When APP received rejections from other banks, they finally found a China state-owned bank to finance their pulp project. After this free tour, in order not to feel guilty, I decided I should do something for the forest and the communities of Sumatra. And I can be the most useful in bridging the Chinese investor and in Indonesian communities. I believe that as a bridge, we Chinese NGOs can share community concerns with Chinese investors. We can transmit a perception of a pump project risk to investors. We can facilitate dialogue among different stakeholders, and we can also promote information and knowledge sharing through diverse platforms. Similar to our strategy in Cambodia cases, we wrote an investigation report on Indonesia pulp development and sent a formal letter to the Chinese investor, the China Development Bank, advising them not lot to fund this project. But this time, we are not as lucky as the Cambodia case to succeed. Chinese bank didn't stop investing in Indonesia pulp mills and even touted their positive contribution on Chinese pulp supply. The negative impact on biodiversity, on the climate, on local indigenous people by Chinese pulp investment have not been sufficiently appreciated by Chinese investors. I and some Chinese environmental organizations continue to advocate Chinese investors that projects with negative impact on biodiversity and the community should be avoided, and a transition to green finance should be made. I will not, of course, it will not easy to achieve these goals, nor are our actions merely symbolic. We need to have more patience and grassroots-like resilience. We think one of the reasons for the negative impact of Chinese overseas investment is that Chinese investors lack understanding of laws and regulations of host countries, and also lack communication with local communities. Therefore, during the pandemic, we developed a clinical program with Professor Judith Shapiro and of American University to develop a handbook for Chinese investors in Indonesia pulp industry, which provided detailed information on Indonesia laws and regulations, responsible investment guidelines, and particularly the right of indigenous people that less emphasized in China. I feel very appreciated that Professor Shapiro is here with us today. And after the handbook was translated into Chinese, we organized a webinar and also mailed the handbook to relevant Chinese forest investors to make maximum use of that handbook. And I will go through rest slide quickly. In addition to China Development Bank, there are also several other Chinese banks investing in paper industry in Indonesia. We believe each financier should at least have a basic and minimum policy to avoid social and environmental harm. Those are called red lines. The Environment People Network selects more than 60 financial institutions, including 18 Chinese banks, which were evaluated and monitored by us. Comparing with the Western banks, Chinese banks have a lower score and a lot of room for improvement in terms of environment and social policies. Because many Indonesian pulp products are sold to China, reducing paper consumption in China is also a way to protect Indonesia forests. We started a consumer education campaign to call on the public to reduce the use of disposable paper products, such as paper cups. We also networking and exchange with more stakeholders, communities, NGOs, scholars, and enterprises for broader cooperation on global forest protection. And at the Convention on Biological Diversity COP15 meetings last December in Montreal, I organized a study event with some other Chinese organizations, invite speakers from Indonesia, Brazil, and other countries to introduce their respective experience in biodiversity conversation, and also give a suggestion on how China can play a more active and positive role in biodiversity conversation. And under the post-2020 biodiversity framework, promoting cooperation between China and other countries to carry out overseas projects and promoting Chinese overseas green investment and green finance will also be the direction of my future work. And frankly speaking, there are still some Chinese people who don't understand Chinese NGO going abroad to carry out overseas projects and question why you care about other countries' biodiversity when the China environment problem have not yet been fully solved. And actually, we heard similar questions 20 years ago. At that time, some people would say, why do you protect the environment when so many people don't have enough to eat? Nowadays, few people disagree with the need to protect the environment. So I think it's impossible to compare the importance between biodiversity conservation inside China and overseas. In Buddhist culture, it's all about fate, 缘分. And fate brought my interest in the forest of Indonesia from a free trip. All I have to do is keep doing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And for the record, he's not just doing it for the free trips. But no, but I do agree that, the kind of the UN fun component that, that takes us on paths. So you started saying like that you're no different, because you're in the same position, but you're doing a lot of cool stuff. And you, a swashbuckling lawyer here, are you ready, Andy? You got to compete against this kind of. I know. And as I'm getting up your PowerPoint, if you have anything else you wanted to say about yourself that I didn't.
Just that in addition to working at the Paulson Institute, I'm the Director of Climate Policy at Edelman Global Advisory here in Washington, D.C.
And you do lots of special projects with Hank Paulson.
That's right. I worked in the office of Hank Paulson, the former Treasury Secretary, who does a lot of great conservation work around the world.
And just came back from China.
That's right.
All right, keeping these conversations going. All right, the floor is yours.
Well, wonderful. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for joining. Really pleased to be a part of this discussion. Today, I'm going to focus my time on the broader issue of global biodiversity finance, and I'm going to outline where I think we are today, how I think we got here, and some ideas for how to move forward. So, where are we today? Jennifer likes that frog.
I do like that frog.
So the number I think you should keep in your head is $710 billion. So this is the global biodiversity financing gap. Or to put that another way, it's the difference, the gap between what we currently spend on biodiversity conservation efforts and what we need to spend. So $710 billion. If we have any hope of halting and reversing biodiversity decline, we need to close that gap to zero. So this number came from a report by the Paulson Institute in partnership with the Nature Conservancy and the Cornell Atkinson Center for Sustainability. And I'm proud to say that it was a key input into the COP15 negotiations and helped to shape the post-2020 global biodiversity framework targets on resource mobilization. So $710 billion, that is the size of the problem, it's the scope of the challenge, and it is manifesting itself in some increasingly visible and pernicious ways. So to give a few examples, if you look at the World Wildlife Fund's Living Planet Index, the decline in vertebrate species, that's mammals, birds, reptiles, it has seen a staggering decline of up to 2/3. That's 69% decline since 1970. In Asia and the Pacific, living populations are down by 55%. If you zoom into China, there's been a 44% decline in China's wildlife population since 1990. It's lost over 400,000 kilohectares of tree coverage, and its wetlands have declined or been degraded by almost 50%. So, to put a face on some of these numbers, this is the spoon-billed sandpiper. There are only about 600 left. You can find them in China's coastal wetlands, and that number is falling. This is the great knot. Its numbers have declined by almost 60% over the last 30 years. I really wish that I had some pictures of that beautiful green peafowl, but maybe next time. So how did we get to this moment of crisis in the natural world? I'm sure all of you are going to be familiar with some of the major causes of biodiversity loss: population growth, invasive species, pollution, climate change. But I think the core issue here, or the overarching issue, is that our economic and political systems and our financial markets do not adequately value nature. Now, it's inherently very complex to try to put a numerical value on something as complicated as biodiversity, and it's inevitably going to be imperfect. But to fail to do so is to implicitly value nature at zero, and when you do that, policymakers, decision makers will treat nature's benefits as free. And that's how you fail to penalize those who destroy nature, and you fail to reward financially those who protect and conserve it. So to put a fine point on this, consider agricultural subsidies. So this is an issue where China looms large because of the massive size of its agricultural market. But the world spends about $500 billion a year on, that's taxpayer-funded money, on subsidies that are harmful to human health, to biodiversity, to climate change, or all of the above. So that's despite the fact that $500 billion actually exceeds the amount that it would cost to just pay farmers to use more nature-friendly practices. So why do we do this then if it's so perverse? I think it's because while we have a good sense of the crops that can get sold or the beef that gets processed and sold, we don't do a good job of valuing the underlying natural capital that can get destroyed in the process. So for example, pollinators. If you look at pollinators like bees, birds, moths, these have immense economic value, but it can sometimes be invisible. If you actually track the lifetime services that these pollinators provide and treat them like a natural capital stock, like any other capital stock, track them over their lifetime, the ecosystem services and the economic value that they provide is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So another elephant in the room is infrastructure development. So human-built infrastructure development has a massive impact on natural habitats. Around 1/6 of the species that are under threat of extinction on the IUCN's Red List are threatened by infrastructure development. And again, this is another issue where China looms large, particularly around the infrastructure projects in its Belt and Road. Something around 60% of all China-financed projects overlap with either critical habitats, protected areas, or indigenous lands. And these areas, these lands, house a lot of very critical and threatened species. So how do we move forward, and how do we close this biodiversity financing gap? So the good news is that some of the most impactful things we can do, some of the most important measures we can take, don't actually require marshaling a lot of new financial resources. So for example, reforming those harmful subsidies that I mentioned. So if you were to reform, phase out, or repurpose that $500 billion in harmful subsidies for forestry, fisheries, and farming, that would get you more than half the way towards closing the biodiversity financing gap. So another issue we need to work on is improving our infrastructure planning. So again, there's going to be trillions of dollars of new investments in infrastructure over the next few decades. So we need to make sure that biodiversity risk management practices begin to be mainstream to reduce and mitigate and offset some of the damage to biodiversity. So the priority for this should be to reduce the harm of infrastructure or of traditional gray infrastructure, but we also need to do a much better job of incorporating green infrastructure or natural infrastructure into our planning. This is doing things like using coastal wetlands for water resource management or to store excess water capacity. This is an issue that the Paulson Institute has been doing a lot of work on the ground. proposing with different Chinese institutions how to incorporate nature-based solutions like mangroves and wetlands into China's emissions trading systems. We've been working to incorporate some green finance solutions like mangrove bonds and developing some different proposals with, again, some of our Chinese partners. Finally, we need financial institutions to better monitor and disclose the impacts, both positive and negative, that they're having on biodiversity. So this is an issue that, again, is going to have a huge impact along the Belt and Road. It's an issue that the Paulson Institute has been working on through our partners in the green investment principles of the Belt and Road, where a big part of that is getting signatories to do a better job of disclosing some of these harmful impacts to biodiversity. So I will end there and just say that there's a lot of interesting experiments going on in the biodiversity financing world. I think there's a ton of growing private sector interest at this point in time. And I'm excited to learn from all of you and for the discussion ahead. Again, thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Can we have applause for our third speaker here? And so we're done with our PowerPoint, so letting the AV team know they could hopefully on Zoom put us all 4 big, beautiful boxes on the screen. We've been beautiful for you big in here and live in person. I'm going to start, I want, since you just finished, you get the benefit. I want to ask you a quick question. Can you tell us a little bit more about the green investment? There's the green investment Belt and Road?
The green investment principles. That's
Green
right.
investment principles. Is this a government, NGO? What is this entity? So it's Paulson with Chinese organizations?
That's
Can
right.
you tell us a little bit about it?
So
Are there NGOs involved, like Jiaozhong?
There are. So the Paulson Institute is a co-drafter of these principles, but it's a mixture of Chinese institutions, of banks, different financial institutions. And the point is to get signatories to agree to some different framework principles that can mainstream some of these biodiversity risk principles into their investments.
And have you seen some results so far, or is it still
It's still early
baby
innings.
steps? Little like the little frog.
That's right. That's right. Just like the little frog. It's early stages. There are still some definitions that need to be worked out. Still a lot of standards that need to be agreed on, but hopeful.
And there have been over the years a lot of other international organizations engaging with like Chinese banks, either NGOs. So this is one way. This is kind of like I don't know if we want to say outside in or and the Chinese government. You know, they have a big the guy Ma Jun that has the king of green finance in China. There's been a lot of movement. Can you say just really quickly anything about what you've seen in China with their green finance push, or Jiaozhong can say something about that?
Sure. I don't know if you would like to go first. So there's been a ton of movement on Chinese green finance. So if you look at what's going on with biodiversity finance, for example, what China has set up with the Kunming Biodiversity Fund, what they're doing on green bonds, there's a ton of movement right now. But I think that the trend that we're watching right now is what's going on with the PBOC's transition finance framework. Because again, one of the biggest issues in China is just figuring out what counts as green, what is going to count as a green bond, what can qualify for some of these preferential loans that might happen in green finance.
Okay. Or maybe Jiaozhong, if you don't want to answer that question, you said that your next maybe full of free trips kind of thing is going to be like on the green financing work, the green banking. Can you tell us like is this going to be a bottom-up kind of work continued?
Yeah.
What might it look like?
Yeah, so as a grassroots organization, so we are still do the things from bottom to up. So we have a cooperation with the Paulson Institution and other think tank or research institutions in China, and so we just try to practice those green finance guidelines or new policies to testify how we can put that on the ground, and also we have several specific cases we brought from our partners from the host countries. So we also want to bring those cases to the decision makers in China and also our partner organization to see how we can help with these cases to improve the environmental governance and also to more benefit local communities. So we are more under the ground level to use that green finance guidelines and to check anything. Maybe also I can give some feedback, anything we can make improvement for these policies and the guidelines.
So it sounds like, so you with Andy, you guys are more on kind of like the advocacy, acting a little bit like glue to get these partners talking. But then here next to me is, this is the woman who sues people. And I was kind of curious that if you can say anything like, I mean, you gave us an example of 3 cases. I know you have like 50 of these public interest lawsuits. Clearly you don't sleep, your team. Can you tell us is there another example you could give us about, of a successful pressure? But you're mainly targeting the companies, not the banks who finance them, right?
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of another case or maybe where one failed? Failed? There's that's not in her vocabulary, ladies and gentlemen. Or how you're still trying.
Yeah, of course they are failed. Half of them, maybe. But one impressive case I want to talk to you is about soil contamination case. It happened in Jiangsu province. In 2016, there is a famous middle school. The students just got sick. But they don't know the reason. They just contact with the school and the government, but the problem didn't resolve. So they contacted the media. The media published this event. We got news, and the media said that just across the road there is a brownfield. The land was contaminated seriously by 3 chemical factories. One of them is toxic, produce toxic chemicals. So we just filed a lawsuit against the 3 factories, and because the government was remediating that contaminated lands and using the public money, but according to the principle polluters pay, the polluters should pay the money, the remediation money. If the polluters don't pay the money, they won't just take care of everything from the beginning. So we sued the companies, but we lost. That enough? But the court also wrote that the plaintiff should pay 1.89 million RMB to the court as the filing fee. So that's devastating for environmental NGOs in China. We lack of money. So we appealed.
Thank you.
And the appealed court said that, the polluters should pay the contaminated money. And the defendant also should pay the filing fee. And environmental NGOs lawyers fee. That's very important for us. But the judge also said the government was remediating the land. So for the remediating fee, the government should ask the money from the company.
Okay, good. Not from you. Good.
Yeah, yeah. But we cannot sue the government.
Gotcha.
That's a problem. So that's why I say we should, just promote to the administrative EPO, environmental public interest litigation. Yeah, NGOs should just get more power against the government.
So do you think that case set a bit of a precedence for your NGO that you wouldn't be hit with filing fees like this in the future, or it's hard to say?
It's hard to say.
'Cause I'm not a lawyer, so
Case by case.
Case
yeah,
by case.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, since I'm not a lawyer, and I think we have some in the room here, I'd like to open up for some questions. And so your little handy-dandy speakers here, it should have a little red light on it. If it's not, press the bottom, turn the whole thing on. Raise your hand, let me know who would like to ask a question. In the back, and yeah, so turn it on, speak into the microphone, say your name and affiliation if you could be so kind.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Kenny. I'm working for World Resources Institute Indonesia. And I have questions for Ms. Ge. I hope I pronounce it
Yeah.
but yeah, okay. So I'm intrigued about your case study on the nature reserve, where the court ruled that the Chinese company must pay for the compensations and for the restorations under the supervisions of public and also like the plaintiff. Just as a comparison, in Indonesia, although there were some huge win on the environmental lawsuits, it is like very hard to execute the court order and also like to collect the payment from the companies. So I'm just wondering, just as for the comparison, like according to Chinese law, what are the legal consequences if the companies or the defendant don't pay the compensation? And yeah, that's all my questions.
Yeah. According to the Chinese law, if the company don't pay the remediation fee, the court can just ask the company pay. Yeah, and because it's environmental public interest litigation, the court actually should ask the company to pay the remediation fee. Yeah, the case I mentioned, actually, the court asked the company pay the 5 million RMB to the court, and the court just supervised the whole process of the remediation process. And the court also invited plaintiffs and the public, including medias, to supervise the whole process of remediation. So it is a successful remediation case, but it is not too much like most of the cases, the company just pay the remediation fee to the government, and so that case ended. But the environment doesn't being remediated. That's a problem.
Quick question, in that case, was this one of those regional courts? Because I've heard, the court that ruled on this case, was that a regional court?
Yes. Actually, our case is the first case of that regional court.
It was a real splash for them, yeah.
Yeah. The interesting thing is we got the news from the media when we just submit our filing documents to the court. The court didn't know. They just had the power to rule this case. They just can take it to the higher court, the provincial court, to check if they have the power. Yeah.
That's awesome. No, I've heard over the years that these regional courts, I mean, they're new, they can't be captured by local governments as easily because they're regional, so
Yes.
good on you, helping to empower and put life into them. Some other questions? Judy, grab the microphone, because you can speak loudly, but there's that whole online stuff.
Does this work?
Yeah, it does
Oh,
indeed.
good. Okay, I'm Judy Shapiro from American University, and I'm really happy to be here. All of the speakers are doing really important work, and it's work that I feel particularly strongly about. And I just want to make a kind of a comment or two, and maybe you guys can react to it. So one concern I have is that international Chinese investment is feeling already very pressured around carbon. And they've already agreed, okay, no more coal-fired power plants, we give up, right? And now, with biodiversity protection efforts, in some ways you're going to the heart of the Belt and Road Initiative, because that's all about infrastructure. And when you're saying, no dams, no high-speed rail, no power plants, no deep water ports, all this stuff, all of it has horrible impacts on biodiversity. And I guess to hear you speak, it's all very, it seems like you're all doing great work and it's all going ahead, and I'm just way more worried or something. I guess the other comment, or maybe you can check me if I'm correct or not about this, but I think at one point the MEE tried to put forward some criteria for international investment around some of these issues. Maybe it's what Paulson is doing, I don't know. And these banks pushed back and said MEE doesn't have any power to regulate us, right? So, maybe it's more positive than I'm thinking. But anyway, those are just a few thoughts I have. I want you to succeed so much, so.
So who wants to leap on that one first?
I'm happy to talk about the first point. So on this tension between biodiversity protection at least the seeming tension between biodiversity protection and climate goals, which will require a huge build out of clean energy infrastructure. There seems to be some conflicting goals there, right? And building massive solar farms will destroy some habitats or degrade some habitats potentially. Building wind farms will kill bats, birds, other pollinators. So it's a very difficult challenge to deal with, but where I land goes back to my second recommendation, which was around just we need to have better infrastructure planning. So there are ways to deal with the carbon issue and the biodiversity issue, I think, in a complementary way. And I think the best example of that is these natural these NBS, nature-based solutions. So things that can deal with carbon as natural carbon sinks, rather than having to build a lot of new man-made infrastructure, could deal with both problems in a complementary way.
Yeah, and I will be glad to continue to make my comment. And first, and of course, the economical development and the environmental protection, the conflict between two has existed for a long while. And I think we all need a balance. But how to make the balance? That I think there are already too many persons to support the development, to support the infrastructure constructions, but the wildlife, they cannot speak, the forest, the river, they cannot speak. So for us as environmentalists, we should speak for the what needs wildlife and nature. So that's we can to achieve the balance. And I'm not the person totally think we should forgive all economical development. People don't need energy supply, people don't need road or don't need a new house. I think that's also very important for sustainable development, but we need to figure out what's the best balance we should achieve. So that's about the conflict with those development. And the second point is about, as Judy mentioned, the MEE and Chinese government has the green guidelines for Chinese overseas investment. That's very good, and at least shows political will want to regulate Chinese overseas investment to promote global sustainable development. But those guidelines are not binding policies. So that means we should also work with the local partners to use domestic regulations to give some binding obligation to Chinese investors and local companies. And also, I think as civil society organizations, our role in green Chinese overseas investment is we can always be a body for the stakeholder. So that means we can try to communicate with government, enterprises, communities, and also some think tank to figure out what's the best solutions that will consider all the benefit for this on this table, all the benefit in this program. So that's also the way for us as local environment groups. So that's, yeah.
But again, the big challenge is that, I mean, we had a webinar a while back. Rebecca Ray from Boston University was talking about how in Latin America, that they've been gathering evidence for years that they've discovered that, Chinese companies come in, they really do obey local laws, because when they had stricter laws for resource extraction, the Chinese kept coming. And then there was a concern when there was a bust in commodity prices that a lot of Latin American countries started lowering their standards, and the Chinese okay, you lowered standards. The Chinese kept coming regardless, and so I think that's kind of the tough issue, because how to get these countries to raise their standards, because it is about governance ultimately locally, and there's there's sometimes maybe a wee bit of corruption locally too. I don't know. Some questions, Jamie, and then Karen.
Hi, I'm Jamie Horsley from the Pulside China Center, and thank you very much for hosting this event and for all of our speakers here. So it strikes me that it was actually great to have the green finance piece in this discussion, because if you talk about where the rubber hits the road on these issues, it's really the banks, the financiers. That's the crux of where the leverage would be. And my understanding is normally banks simply require the companies and implementers to make sure they do the environmental and social impact. And so the banks don't get directly involved in that process and in dealing with stakeholders and hearing from stakeholders. So I guess my question is whether the work that Zhao Zhong is doing and work with Gefeng, it strikes me, she's got some work she can do overseas working with local communities on how they should try to raise those standards and laws and enforce them then locally too. But from a policy perspective, and Andy, maybe you have some thoughts too, working with banks and policy issues, on the green finance issues, is how can you get the voice of the stakeholders, speaking both for people and nature, more directly involved in the finance stage of it? Do you have any thoughts about what changes could be made? Because right now, again, it seems to me the banks are somewhat removed and are not having to directly face those issues. And I think that we should get them to know more about that so they take these requirements more seriously. So I welcome your thoughts.
Yes, and thanks for the question. And first, of course, we need more bridges, and those bridges can connect the community and the Chinese banks. So that's the first thing. And the second, of course, we also need the mechanism. For example, the complaint mechanism. If the local community are raising some issues caused by Chinese overseas, how they can make a complaint these issues to the Chinese banks, and then currently, there are no mechanism for the complaint. So that's also many environmentalists and researchers I try to advocate and suggest the Chinese government to establish this complaint system in the banking system.
I would just add that we've had a lot of conversation with different financial institutions, and we are seeing that there's a real growing interest from banks and different financial firms around nature-related risks. It seems to be, I don't know, 5-10 years behind where financial firms were on climate, but the biodiversity issue has been able to piggyback on a lot of the progress that's been made, for instance, on the task force for climate-related financial disclosures. Now there is this task force for nature-related financial disclosures, and a lot of financial institutions are working through how to manage, monitor, and disclose some of those risks now. But it's a very difficult and complicated issue because it's not quite like carbon and climate, where you mostly are just managing a ton of carbon, or you're measuring how much carbon gets released. With biodiversity risks, it's just a much more difficult conversation because of the breadth of issues and biodiversity risks that you could potentially be talking about.
Gufeng, do you want anything to add to that? No? Yeah. So she's not going to take her public interest lawsuit routine on the Belt and Road just yet. You have plenty of work inside China. But that even raises, I mean, I'm just curious, you being lawyer woman, is public interest law, I mean, do we know, does Indonesia, do they have a public interest law where NGOs can sue in the public interest? Asking the Indonesian man in the corner here.
Yeah, they have, according to we have environmental law act in 2009, and it allows it gives the legal standing for the NGOs to.
Okay.
But usually they for the civil lawsuit, usually the government who become the plaintiff to sue. For example, on the case of forest fires, but for administrative cases to annul the license and stuff, usually NGOs are the upfront.
Okay, good. All right. Karen and Jennifer, we'll do 2 questions. Gather those 2 questions.
Yes, my name is Karen Mansell. I'm a professor at The Ohio State University. And my question is about landscape fragmentation. One of the biggest threats to biodiversity is the fragmentation of landscapes. Not enough area to support a population of a species. And China has both some of the most fragmented landscapes on the planet and also some of the least fragmented landscapes on the planet in Western China. So you could just imagine that a local official making a decision about extending a road, which is a fragmenting element, very efficiently getting from point A to point B, just putting a line on a map without thinking about how this is cutting up the landscape. So in the United States, in the late 60s and in 1970, we passed a law that for every major project like this, we have to produce an environmental impact statement. And this environmental impact statement gives the opportunity to reveal, environmental professionals develop these, reveal to the decision makers that, yeah, if you put this road here, it will have a big impact. But if you moved it, you could still have the road. You could just put it in a different place. It's a kind of an innocent, damaging decision without that type of an assessment. Do you see the potential for requiring environmental impact statements being done in China before infrastructure is developed, or on these Belt and Road projects, having an environmental impact statement developed so that when the decision is made to go forward, it can be done in a way that has less impact on biodiversity and also on the environment?
Okay, hold that question. Jennifer? We'll collect 2 questions. She's biting here. She wants EIA. You had her
So I'm just asking a question from the online chat. So Changhua Hu from she's a China Asia director from the office of Jeremy Rifkin, asked how would sustainable infrastructure financing label schemes play their due role to enhance the accountability, such as the FAST infra label, among others.
Can you repeat the question?
How would sustainable infrastructure financing label schemes play their due role to enhance their accountability, such as the FAST infra label, among others?
Okay, so the labeling schemes like fast infra. Okay. All right, so let's start off with, China does have an environmental impact assessment
Yes.
law. They've been going on for years, and they're wonderful, right?
No.
No, okay. Tell us a little bit about what could be done better.
Yeah. Actually, China set up the EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment System, about more than 10 years, 20 years ago. And, but public participation is weak during the whole process of EIA. That's a problem. The three cases I introduced, 2 of them have EIA, but EIA didn't prevent the risk of the construction on environment and ecosystem. For example, for green PFAS case, the company just evaluate the impact of the construction, and the result was that there is not the habitat of a green PFAS. Yeah, and they even didn't mention the quantities of the green PFAS. So they didn't do nothing about the green PFAS. That's a problem. So that's the importance of environmental public interest litigation filed by NGO. When NGO find the problems of the administrative enforcement, we can take our power into the court. That's very important. So, but the most important thing is we have to promote the public participation in the beginning, not the last phase. Because, for example, the green PFAS case, the company already invested billions of money into the construction of the dam. Yeah, a lot of money for the company. Actually, the company is controlled by the central government, you can see. So a lot of loss of society resources, actually. So I can just respond to Jamie's question. Yes, green finance is more important because if green finance is going in the beginning, we can prevent the risk on environment and ecosystem.
Yeah, I
Okay,
just want.
I know,
yeah.
you were like, look what your EIA question did there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just want to make the discussion more interesting. I want to debate with Gofeng, and I have a different opinion about the EIA enforcement in protected areas. I think, especially after 2014, the Qilianshan event and also the Two Mountains areas has been reached, and by Chinese central government, the environmental impact has been well done in the protected areas. I think that might be the red line for all protected areas, administrative, and also the China has introduced the national park system, and maybe from the U.S. And so a new big project is to collect separated protected areas with ecological corridors, and to collect to establish the migration corridor for wildlife and also for the ecosystem. But we also need to think about totally opposite directions. That's about the social impact. And China has a binding EIA, environmental impact assessment, but the social impact is not mandatory. And some World Bank or international foundation funded program require this program to pass the social impact. But most of the program without social impact. So that's good if there's a new project to collect separated nature reserve. That's good for the environment. But if local residents are required to resettlement, that might be some social issues. So that's come back to my position as NGOs. We also want to working closely with those communities and want to empower their voice and also bring their concern, especially many local persons, they don't want to remove, they want to continue their culture, their tradition, how they can keep their tradition. At the same time, also make a contribution for biodiversity conversation. That should be a big issue that need more and more NGOs involvement.
I think that's an excellent point, because I was just reflecting on the Yangtze River protection law that was about a year and a half ago, and it announced no more fishing or aquaculture in the Yangtze River basin. And I'm like, what's going to happen to those farmers, those fishers? Like, they were evidently given compensation and, just leave. Yeah. And so, but I mean, same thing. We hear this with the miners over the years, and sometimes they come back and open. But yeah, it's just, but sometimes, this very top down, which is why I think it's so important that we hear, like, the NGOs here in China, trying to remind, that the bottom up, the eyes and the ears of what's happening on the ground is also critical for these policies to be successful. Preaching to the choir here. Do you have anything to ask? How about that labeling scheme question?
So I don't know that I'm familiar with that precise example, but I will just say on the topic of sustainable finance, labeling schemes, definitions, common standards, I think this is one of the most important lines of effort in green finance, is making sure that everyone is speaking the same language and has common standards for things like who could qualify for a green bond. Currently, it's kind of like when you go into a grocery store and something is labeled organic and you have no idea what that means, because it means something else for everybody. So we need to move away from that in the green finance space.
But there is actually a lot of competition. There's like the Fast Infra, there's the Blue Dot Network in the US with some Japan and European partners, just trying to scurrying forward and trying to set standards, but it just, it's kind of confusing.
Right, and it's confusing, and when you have all of these incompatible and conflicting standards, it just slows down the process by which these projects and this infrastructure can actually get financed.
Okay, was there any? Okay, a two-finger from she says. A two-finger from Judith and Jennifer. Are there any more online questions? Two more. Okay, we'll do those quick and we'll wrap up. Okay.
So, Zhao Zhou, you mentioned the two mountains theory. And I don't know if everybody knows what that is. Probably most people here do. But I'm wondering, you mentioned it in a very positive way. But sometimes we're afraid that the two mountains theory is a kind of ecological modernization sort of self-deception, because it's talking about prosperity and conservation at the same time, and there's no contradiction in between those. You can be rich and green, right? And this is the Xi Jinping vision of ecological civilization. So I'm just wondering, I don't want you to criticize Xi Jinping's grand vision, but but I'm wondering if you want to comment on that.
Can we have silver and green mountains, I guess she's saying.
Yeah, I will say.
Gold or silver? Gold and green. Sorry.
Yeah, I will say it's a very positive political will to protect the environment, and it's very good for the sustainable development. And is there anything I can criticize? Maybe not, because I still need to go back to China. And but still, many things we can do under the two mountains theory. And so, as you mentioned, they also want to achieve a perspective at the same time for the conservation. So that's, of course, there should be many conflicts. But for us as local organizations, we don't want to say the theory is good or not, but we just try make our best to solve the problem we can see during the procedure to achieve that will of two mountain theories. And I think, many things we can do. We should focus on what we can and try our best and to balance the perspective and ecological conversation, and also make more and more people can benefit from the conservation. And that's not the win or lose. There should be some middle way. That means just like a win-win. Everyone can be satisfied during that procedure. Yeah.
But you know, Judy, and everyone else, the mountainous slogans and ecological civilization, which when it came out, and what was that, 10 plus years ago, it seemed really fluffy. But it has really been this kind of force moving the war on pollution and these pretty progressive and aggressive, you know, I'm not saying that they're always successful, but the idea is that we need to clean it up because it is hurting our economy, some of the pollution stuff. Jennifer, real quick, and we'll get real quick questions from online and real quick responses. Say it nice and clear
I'll
first.
get
Yeah.
just one question then.
Okay.
So this is from Dr. Michael M. Dadu, and he asks, is China working for the benefit of the world?
And what was the other question?
The other question was someone from Gilgit, which borders Xinjiang, and talking about how their forests, pastures, and rivers are endangered due to China's mega projects, including dams, resource extraction, glacial melt, and floods intensified. This year, glacial floods start in April. What can China's government do to mitigate impact?
And this was like across the border in Central Asia?
Yeah, I think it's in Pakistan, I believe.
In Pakistan? Okay.
Yeah.
Does anyone want, so the first one was like, what is China doing to?
Is China working for the world?
Is China working for the world? I don't know, can we answer? I don't know if we can answer that question.
Can I defer my minute answer to Dr. Shapiro? Because her book is one of the
China
best
Goes
resources
Green?
on this answer. Yes, China Goes Green. There's some wonderful answers in there.
Do you want that hot potato question?
So buy the book.
Go buy the book. Okay, well, I think on that note, well, we don't, but what I could respond to that is that over the years, my 23 years at the Wilson Center, that, I've had Chinese government, NGO, business, and researchers, a lot of, less since COVID, obviously, but a lot of interaction, a lot of innovation. I mean, look, we had these 2 NGOs, and I always feel like the NGOs in China is always, you're my bright, happy space. Because it's not just that what you do alone, but how you've become kind of a glue, bringing in, government and even business, sometimes suing them, but you're still bringing them in. So I want to end on kind of a happy note, but it's like, yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. But I want to thank all of you for coming, both online and here. And guess what? The speakers are here, and you could come up and ask them questions. Please do, because it's a new thing we're doing in DC, in-person meetings. And I want to highlight that next week we're having, I'm a baseball fan, so I have to say, we have a doubleheader next week, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be talking about short-lived climate pollutants in 2 different meetings. One is going to be super pollutants in China. We've got Zhang Lin from UC Berkeley and a couple other cool folks talking about great things like nitrous oxides and methane and all those good things. And then on the next day, we're having a California-only speaker. It's going to be we've reining in the methane hoofprint of cows in California. Lessons for China. All right, but I want to thank the Luce Foundation that supported this meeting, and hopefully, if you're not on my mailing list, please join it and come again. Next week, our Tuesday meeting is in person. Thank you, everyone. Applause for the speakers. And it's a wrap.